that is the Asian Koel. So have you ever wondered why this enigmatic bird always makes this call in the wee hours of the morning? Well, today's talk will delve into that and understand why birds make these calls and how we can use these calls to understand research, identification, and conservation. So, why do birds even call? Broadly speaking, bird vocalizations are acoustic signals that transmit information about the presence, location, and intentions of the sender, often triggering social interactions. So these vocalizations can be split into two main categories, songs and calls. And within these categories, there are further subdivisions where songs can be split into subsongs and duets, and calls can be split into contact calls, flight calls, alarm calls, and begging calls. So let's get the ball rolling by practicing some simple bird identification. I'm sure some of you might have heard this call earlier, and if you can guess this answer, please raise your hand and there will be prizes. So when you guess, try to identify what species it is and what type of vocalization it's making. Does anyone want to try? Yes? Unfortunately, that's incorrect. Does anyone else want to try?
Oriental Magpie-Robins.
What type of vocalization is it making? It's related to that, but so what vocalization makes that? Do you know? Oh, that's also one of the functions, but I showed it on the slide earlier. It's one of those. Do you remember? Yeah, very close. It is the song. It's the song of the Magpie-Robin. I think good job. So now I'll be moving on into songs and why songs are important to birds. So songs have two main functions, territory defense and attracting a mate. Songs are often sung by the male individuals to basically showcase dominance, telling other male birds that this is my territory, do not enter or I will strike you down. Then songs are also basically the human equivalent of flirting or creating a Tinder account and advertising yourself as ready to mingle. Not that I would know because I don't do that. They are used, so when they do this, they attract females into their territory and they will possibly find a mate. So what makes songs distinct compared to other vocalizations? Why is it different from calls? Songs are very melodious in nature. Like as you heard earlier, that Oriental Magpie-Robin is a very sweet song. You could play that to your kid to let them sleep at night. And they're much more musically complex, but they vary a lot in their notes and their pitch compared to songs which could be like one note or two notes only. Next, they are very distinct. They're very easily recognizable. For example, like you're able to assign like, oh, this is the song of the alienated barbet very easily. And lastly, songs are usually very loud because they want to attract as much attention to increase the chances of potential rivals or mates hearing it and responding. So here's an example. What best example than the loudest bird in the world, the white-belled bird. So this is like one of the loudest birds in the world. And in female white-belled birds, the female actually would prefer the males that are louder. So this shows how loud songs really are in the bird world. So moving on, birds may also duet, where both male and female will actually contribute to the song, either synchronously or alternately. Duets in general help to enhance pairing and coordinate breeding efforts. An antiphono duet is one where a male or female begins a song and his partner will join in and take turns singing. So fundamentally, antiphono duets are rapid alternation of notes sung by each bird. Sometimes there is just a gap of a few milliseconds between the parts sung by each bird in the duet. These tight-knit duets help mating birds locate each other. So duets also have another function. They are made in territorial conflicts. So it demonstrates how the territory is defended by an alliance of two birds rather than just one. So it's a more effective deterrent to rivals and potential predators. Because like a 2v1 is obviously better than a 1v1. So one fun fact is that there's actually a research done by the Max Planck Institution of Ornithology, where they use mobile transmitters to record neural and acoustic signals from pairs of duetting white-browed sparrows. And they found that the nerve cell activity in the brain synchronizes with its partner. So this is so cool because it shows how the duets allow for like the greater connections between the pairs of birds. Nextly, we'll be moving on into how songs may be incorporated I think that's the one. Songs may be incorporated with a bird's courtship display. For instance, in our group earlier, we actually saw this happening. The zebra dove was performing its physical display such where it was bowing down and spreading its tail, while combining it with soft rhythmic coos. So this coordination of sound and motion makes the display more conspicuous and can better capture the attraction of potential mates. Courtship rituals in some species may also include synchronized singing performances, where males will perform elaborate songs in order to impress the females. Next, we'll be moving on onto subsongs, which are a variation of songs that are typically soft and highly variable, and they are much lesser heard compared to songs. So these vocalizations differ, and they are more commonly produced by juveniles who are still in the early stages of song learning. So this functions as a form of vocal practice, and it allows them to basically trial and error and learn memorize the species-specific song patterns, as they are able to experiment with the different notes and develop the different sequences. So other group of birds that may make this call is basically adults outside of breeding season with low sexual motivation, or during first year birds and during non-breeding season they have not set up permanent territory. So this allows them to practice and develop their vocal repertoire without provoking aggression from established adults, as its quiet and unstructured nature is less likely to be perceived as a territorial challenge. So we're done with songs. So now we'll be moving on to calls. So calls, on the other hand, is akin to human conversation. Overall, it is a means of communication and are melodically much more simplistic than songs. So they can be distinguished into four main categories: contact, flight, alarm, and begging. So for the next section, I will play a call, and I want you to guess what species of bird it is and what type of call. Oh, oops. I think I messed up one of the signs. Okay. If anyone can guess this. Unfortunately, no. Okay, the hint is a brood parasite.
This is not the bird on the picture.
Yeah, it's not.
Okay. Should I go ahead and ask for it?
Yeah. I think I messed up there.
It's okay.
Okay. I'll talk about flight calls. If anyone doesn't know, yeah, it's a violet cuckoo's flight call. So, flight calls are made by birds when they are airborne during sustained flight. They are relatively simple notes compared to other types of calls and songs. And mainly, migratory birds will make these flight calls during their long-distance migration journeys at night. Because it's low visibility, it's complete darkness, they use these flight calls as signals to help orientate the flock and coordinate themselves. By doing this, they signal their position and intended direction in order to ensure no one in the flock gets lost and prevents collisions in the dense formations. So flight calls may also be made during the day, and this is usually done in order to signal their position and movement to rivals. So as you heard earlier, that violet cuckoo, when it's flying into a new territory, will make that two-note call. So just to tell that every other violet cuckoo in the area that is coming into their territory or moving past their territory. So how can we use this in research? As migratory passerines usually migrate at night, where there is low visibility, the nocturnal flight calls by migrants have become essential in studying and monitoring bird migration patterns. A study in Beijing, where a recorder was set up on the roof of a tall building, was able to obtain 3,490 recordings across 4 migration seasons. These recordings allowed counting of specific species in migration through identifying their nocturnal flight call. By analyzing these recordings, researchers were able to monitor nocturnal migration timings, estimate species abundance, and even detect species that are otherwise rarely observed visually. This method, known as acoustic monitoring, is now an important tool in bird conservation, especially along major flyways. Yes.
Okay, the call then.
Can anyone guess this song? is a common forest bird, but it also sometimes wanders into our parkland. Yes, it's a babbler. So this is a pinstripe tit babbler making its contact call. So contact calls are usually made by birds in foraging flocks, and in order to coordinate movements and maintain the flock. So bird babblers, most of them are actually gregarious, and they're very social birds. So that's why you often hear them making these contact calls and chattering to each other and telling them, basically in the foraging flock, these contact calls help to maintain the flock cohesion. Now we'll be moving on to okay, yeah, I already saw the answer. So does anyone know the answer? Okay, so it's a red wattle lapwing's alarm call. So alarm calls are able to alert each bird of a potential threat in the area and allow their fellow birds to evacuate the area and decrease the risk of predation, or it is to solicit mobbing behavior, which I will expand on later. So alarm calls, birds have different specific alarm calls for different threats, which are determined on different factors, namely the type of threat, predator behavior, and predator proximity. For type of predator, one example of this is the Japanese tit. It has a snake-specific alarm call, which was proven in a scientific study by the Kyoto University. When this alarm call was played, the Japanese tit will react to a stick being moved in a serpentine fashion, as there is an evocation of a snake-specific search image. However, this is not the case when the other calls of the Japanese tit were played. They did not react to the stick being moved in a snake-like manner at all. Additionally, this study also proved co-species dependency on alarm calls, because when this snake-specific alarm call was played, the co-tit will also react to the stick being moved. So this proves how there are different types of calls for different types of predators. Additionally, predator behavior will also determine the immediacy of danger. For example, a flying raptor is definitely more dangerous than a perched raptor that isn't actively hunting. So it's basically like a level 100 boss versus a level 10 boss. So this way, the birds will recognize that there is a lower threat, and they're able to make different alarm calls to ensure that they'll prompt faster and stronger responses if an alarm call is made for a flying raptor. So one example of this is the New Holland honeyeater, because it will incorporate more elements into its alarm call when facing more dangerous or immediate threats. Lastly, we'll be moving on to the last factor that determines the alarm call, which is predator proximity. The closer a predator gets, the alarm call usually gets more frequent, louder, or more intense to reflect the increasing level of danger. One bird that does this is the Arabian babbler, which is known to switch between different call types depending on how near the threat is. Now, as earlier I talked about mobbing, we'll be now expanding on that. So besides fleeing the area like a coward, some birds, which are more gangster, will gang out on the predator and try to drive it out of the territory, I mean. So mobbing calls transmits acoustic signals to other birds nearby to counter predator attacks and drive the predator out of their habitat. This allows multiple species to mob and gang out on the predator to drive it out of the territory, when other species who are eavesdropping on an alarm call will go to investigate. So one example of this will be in the next slide. You see this barred owl getting mobbed by a gang of other birds. So that's a mobbing call. So basically what they're trying to do is try and scare it out of his territory. Okay. Now we'll be moving on to the last type of call, which is begging calls. So begging calls are usually made by juveniles as well as chicks in the nest. And it's quite self-explanatory. When the baby wants, like for a human being, when the baby is hungry, it'll cry, and this is basically the same thing. So they will make these begging calls in order to get the attention of the parent and solicit feeding behavior. the urgency and loudness of such calls will also scale with the chick's levels of need, like how your baby will cry louder the more hungry it is. So now this is an example of a begging call in abaya weavers. He's soliciting the feeding behavior of the duck. So now I'll be moving on to a very unique type of vocalization. For most birders, one's frustration is jongos and leaf birds because they're able to mimic the calls and songs of other species. But why do they do this? Are they just like tricksters at heart? So it's actually quite unique in the way jongos will mimic the alarm calls and contact calls of other birds in order to start mixed feeding flocks. So when these mixed feeding flocks happen, the jongo will actually join in and be able to prey on the insects flushed by the flock. So in other species, mimicry is also incorporated with their songs. So instead of just trying to benefit by tricking other birds, they'll actually mimic the sounds of other birds in order to impress the females. So for example, in satin bowerbird and superb lyrebird, the greater its repertoire of mimic vocalizations and sounds, the more likely a female would fall for the male. So here's a video of a very interesting showcase of mimicry by the superb lyrebird. So this is very attractive to a female. Hey, now that we know all about bird vocalizations and why they make these certain types of bird vocalizations, let's move on onto the conditions, like the optimal conditions. So firstly, one of them is the dawn chorus. It is a phenomenon when numerous species will all call simultaneously at dawn. In other countries, the species count can go up to like 20 or 30, but in Singapore, maybe the best we'll get is 10 species. For example, along rifle range link, the best like dawn chorus I've ever heard, maybe like greater racket-tailed jongo, short-tailed babbler, cream-vented boo-boo, red-eyed boo-boo, pinch-shafted babbler, abbot's babbler, like all the common forest species, and we all calling it dawn. So the dawn chorus has a few hypotheses onto why this happens. So some hypothesize that it can be explained by how sound travels in the cool morning air and how there is lower ambient noise and lower wind interference, thus making it more efficient for signaling territory and attracting mates. So remember that annoying Koel at 5 AM waking you up is taking advantage of those perfect acoustic conditions for maximum audience reach. So how can you tell when a bird is singing? It's when they're taking a stage and performing, they will be propped up on a singular high branch or the peak of a rocky outcrop in order to ensure its cries go as far as possible to reach as many potential mates and rivals. Some species will even possess specialized anatomical adaptations to enhance their vocalizations. For instance, certain babblers, such as the chestnut-winged babbler, will have inflatable throat sacs that expand when they call or sing, basically acting as like they're able to amplify and project their sounds over greater distances. So since it's a forest species, in these dense forest environments where visibility is low and sound transmission is easily obstructed, this adaptation is especially useful. So here's an example of a real babbler expanding its throat sac while making its song. And you see how the throat sacs are expanding. So now I'll be moving on into seasonality. So birds will usually only sing during their breeding season. So I would like you to guess what bird is making this vocalization. So here's a hint. It's a common migrant in Singapore, which commonly sings in April. Does anyone know the answer of what bird this is? Yes. Okay, so Arctic warbler is one of like the common migrants in Singapore, and migrants they actually usually won't sing on migration because when males they only need to sing to defend their territory and attract mates. But if they're not going to breed in Singapore, then why do you need to make this call? However, they still do actually sing in Singapore because they will need to rehearse and practice their songs before going back to their breeding grounds. So, nextly, noise pollution can also actually significantly influence when birds choose to vocalize throughout the day. For our group earlier, we passed by a super loud cleaning machine. Then every time like we're trying to talk, we get interrupted. Then we realized that no birds were even singing or calling nearby the machine because of how loud it was. So, in environments with high levels of background noise, whether from human activities such as traffic or construction, or even natural sources like insect choruses, birds will often avoid calling during these periods because their signals will be masked and it's less effective. So they're wasting all their energy into singing when no one's going to hear them anyway. So if you want to find out more about how insects actually influence bird times of vocalizations, you can scan this QR code over here to an article written by Bird Society. So next we'll be moving on into how to hone our birding by ear. So birding by ear is the practice of identifying birds down to species level by recognizing the different distinct vocalizations each species makes. It is challenging to get the hang of it, but it brings about great rewards. As birders, you can waste less time tracking a bird down if you do not recognize it. But if you can recognize its call, you can immediately identify it without having to waste the time to find it. So this will help in poor light conditions when birds are in dense vegetation or at night. So with a single species being able to produce a myriad of vocalizations, like the common Eora has 20 calls, 20 vocalizations, how can the newbie birder comprehend with over 400 species of birds in Singapore? So a good skill is being able to recognize the different sound patterns, which I'm sure many of the guides should have talked about. So, like what is the pitch, what's the speed of the notes, how many notes are there in the bird's vocalization, whether it's nasal sounding, how harsh it is. You can even relate it to like man-made sounds, like bells, flutes, whistling, and metallic sounds. So, for example, the bell minor in Australia, it makes a sound, a call that sounds exactly like a bell being rung. Then in Singapore, we have the Asian glossy starling, which makes very metallic sounding noises, and the coppersmith barbet, which gets its name because its song sounds like a sheet of copper being hit. So, you can also use bird call. You can also use mnemonics to remember these calls. For example, some birds will actually have the sound of their songs in their names. For example, the Koel and the brown boo-boo, where the brown boo-boo's call is like whoop, 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 whoop. Then there are certain birds where you can memorize their calls like by remembering like a certain phrase. For example, a Chinese francolin, not in Singapore, it has like birders remember it like come to the peak, ha ha. It sounds something like this. So I want you to try this out by trying to make a mnemonic for the song of the noisy pitta. Oh, is there one more? Yeah. Does anyone like have any idea of how to? So anyone describe this call in like good words? Does anyone give it a try? You can get stickers. You can get these stickers. Free stickers. Does anyone give it a try? Oh yes.
It's like a very high pitch.
Yeah, like maybe like use words. Like for example, for a yellow bark warbler, I would describe it as like chew it, chew it. So do you want to try describing it in the word? Okay, good attempt though. Like I think you can still get give him a sticker. Okay, but basically in Australia, how birders will remember this right? It's like walk to work, walk to work. Yeah, that's how the Australian birders memorize it. So moving on to the next section, let's have another round of who's that bird? Yeah. So what bird is this? Does anyone know? Anyone know? Just give a guess. Just throw out a shot in the dark. Anyone give it a try? You look like you want to give it a try.
Yeah, some sort of woodpecker.
That was a trick question. It's not even a bird. It's actually a squirrel. So this highlights the importance of learning the calls of other wildlife as well. Because they're in the forest, not just birds make noises. Like squirrels, frogs, and insects as well, they also make noises, and it's vital to learn these to avoid confusing them for birds. Many birders can spend a lot of time tracking a call, and it just turns out to be a squirrel. And at night, this issue is made even worse because owls are the minority inside the chorus at night, where insects and frogs will be the dominant animals calling at night. So it's important to learn these calls so you don't mistake them for owls or nightjars. So next, we're moving on to the tools and resources we can use to hone our birding by ear. We can use Xenocanto, spelled Xenocanto. It is an online website which is readily available for all to access a huge database of not just bird vocalizations, but frogs and bats as well, and mammals also. So you can actually filter the calls to subspecies too, which is useful as certain species in Singapore have different calls in other regions due to differing subspecies. So one easy way to use this, if you don't want to just go to the website and search the bird name, which is kind of tedious, you can just search on the Google yellow-vented boo-boo songs or yellow-vented boo-boo sounds, and the first thing that comes up is usually the Xenocanto link. So another way we can use online resources is Merlin's Voice ID and BirdNet, which are two applications which are AI-powered algorithms which identify bird calls. However, we should use this in caution because, especially in Singapore, many of the bird calls in our region have not been annotated yet, and hence is quite prone to misidentification. However, this AI tools can be a baseline for maybe recognizing what family the bird is in. So maybe you can recognize it's a sunbird, but can't recognize what specific species it is. However, if you're in America or other countries, these AI algorithms are more reliable. So for now, try to use it less if you really cannot find out. And I think it's better to consult the expert birders in the field than to rely on these AI apps. So honing birding by ear mostly comes from experience by tracking down these vocalizations and matching the sound with the face of the birds. So I talked a lot about bird vocalizations, when to hear them and what they do, but why do we care so much about them to the point we need to record them? So recording actually aids in the identification of similar sounding birds. If you hear a call that you're unsure about in the field, if you record it, you are able to cross-check with online resources as well as seek expert opinion on it. So identification of some similar sounding species can also only be done through recordings. One very exemplary example of this is the pure-legged leaf warbler and second leaf warbler. So it is as they don't make their songs in Singapore, they only make their calls which are almost indistinguishable by the bare ear. So in order to tell them apart, you need to get a recording of it and analyze their vocalization on a spectrogram, where you are able to see the frequency of the call. So the frequency of second is around 5 kHz, while pure-legged leaf warbler is around 6 kHz. So I will elaborate deeper on how to analyze spectrograms in a later portion. Now, in addition, recording bird calls is also vital for taxonomy. Subspecies of birds can sometimes only be split through minute differences in their calls. One notable example of this is the rote Myzomela, which looks visually identical to other Myzomelas in the region, but vocal differences help reveal it was a new species. Uploading recorded audio onto eBird and as well as Xenocanto is imperative to giving resources to our fellow birders around us to help us all learn as well. This also aids in the training of the AI models I mentioned earlier, as we get a greater database to annotate and improve. So maybe one day, with all the contributions from y'all to these websites, we'll be able to have the Merlin and BirdNet will be able to accurately and reliably ID bird calls. So recordings might also reveal new discoveries in certain birds' repertoires, such as a new type of subsong, a new type of call that this bird is not known to make. So, how has bird recording changed throughout the years to the point where most of us can actually do it just on our smartphones by ourselves? So let's take a quick history lesson. So the first ever known bird recording was an Indian Shama from the Frankfurt Zoo in 1889 by Ludwig, who was only 8 at the time. It was recorded using the first ever retail recording device at the time, which is the Edison cylinder machine. It was used in the 1900s to obtain some of the first recordings of shorebirds, wild shorebirds in England. Before more complicated recording equipment was invented, birdsong was usually transcribed on paper with phonetic transcription. So basically it's like sheet music. So can you imagine using sheet music to record bird calls? It was very hard back then. But since then, bird field recordings has greatly improved as recording and acoustic technology advanced as well. With the parabolic refractor pioneered in the 1932, it enabled songs to be collected accurately from far distances, as well as spectrograms, which were invented during World War II, which gave us a visual representative to sound. Presently, recording calls is now easily accessible, with microphones installed in mobile devices which are all sufficient in obtaining high quality recordings. Now that we know the history and importance of recording calls, let's delve onto how you can record them. Nowadays, like I said earlier, our modern smartphones are sufficient. You can basically just download any recording app, like an MP3 recorder, and save these files in MP3 where they can be shared and uploaded easily onto Zenocanto as well as the Macaulay library on eBird. So, if you would like to maybe up your game and try out more professional equipment, you can try buying a recorder and combining it with a directional mic or shotgun mic. So, this system is quite portable and lightweight, as if you are in my group earlier, Colin showcased how the directional mic and recorder look like. So when we have these recordings, we should actually upload these recordings into platforms such as eBird and Zenocanto to allow others to learn this bird calls and grow the database. So it is when we're uploading these calls onto these websites, it is vital to record down field information about these calls. So whether the bird was seen, whether playback was used, if you're able to do so, the gender of the bird, what vocalization was it making? Was it making a song, its call, its alarm call? It's all extremely important to increasing the quality of data that you're providing. So moving on, how do we analyze these calls and make the most of it? So online programs like Audacity, you can use it to edit your audio files, where you can remove background noise and amplify faint calls. Audacity also allows you to analyze these songs on a spectrogram, which allows you to visualize the shape of the calls on the diagram and see basically the frequency of it. So these analyses can also be done on Zenocanto or eBird. When you upload them, they will give you the visual representation of the call through the spectrogram. So how do these spectrograms work? So here you can see the x-axis is the time, the y-axis is the frequency, and you can basically make out the notes here. And basically the color intensity will represent the amplitude. So the louder the bird is calling, the darker the notes will look like. So in conclusion, the next time you hear a sunbird chirping in your garden, you're not just hearing a noise, you're listening to something much more complex. By understanding vocalizations, we understand bird ecology. Advances in recording technology, we can now study these sounds in ways that contribute to research, taxonomy, and conservation. Ultimately, by learning to recognize these sounds, not only do we become a better birder, we gain deeper insights into the hidden lives of birds. So keep your ears open next time you're out, and you just might find the next mega. Thank you.